Zoom, Mozilla Fire Zoom meeting.
Hi,
Hey, Norb,
who's there?
that's Bill.
Hi, Bill. Okay.
Okay,
Am I the first one?
you're the first one. Even beat me to it.
Can you see me?
I can see you.
More.
Okay, good.
So we'll see what happens next.
Right.
I've got 20 people signed up. There were a couple more that came in over the last couple of days.
Oh, good.
So the only thing was, let's see, we had George Folk said he was getting his second vaccine shot today, and so he might not feel up to it. So if
Oh,
he's
okay.
there,
Okay.
he said he may just sit in and I gotta admit, okay, that's Stas.
I don't know most of these guys. Your
These are-
classmates.
Not from my class.
Yeah, right, right. That's good.
Okay.
I'm glad I can be part of it.
How do we keep on?
As people come on, we'll get you to-
Evening, guys.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
Okay, let's see who else comes on.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. I can see you.
Good.
You're in a different place, Stan.
What?
You're in a different place, right?
Yeah, if we're gonna have 2,000 people, figured I have to get a bigger screen.
There aren't even that many that that went to St. Joe's that are living.
No.
Hey, Joe Sheley is coming online. There he is.
Okay. Hi, Joe.
Hey, hi.
Oh, there's Norb. Norb.
Yeah.
Is that you, Norb? Hey, now I know what you look like, man.
Yeah. Who are you? Who said that?
Joe Sheley said it to Norb.
Yeah. Okay. Great, Joe. Yeah. It's good to see you.
And who am I talking to? Because you're not up top. Bill?
I'm up here.
You're Bill. Gotcha.
I'm Bill. We got about 20 people altogether
Oh, wow.
who are signed up. A couple of recent additions over the last couple of days. So we'll just wait and see who shows up.
Yep. Yep.
I have an idea and maybe a suggestion to have everybody be on mute and then unmute themselves when they share. And the reason for that is it'll eliminate a lot of background noise.
Yep.
I mean, and just in case you don't know, if you're at a computer, all you have to do is hold down the space bar. That's what I'm doing right now because I'm on mute.
Hey, you teach me something every time I learn something about you, Norb.
Well, yeah, there's a lot about me that you don't know yet.
And some we don't want to know.
And some you're not gonna know.
Okay, we got a few more that are in there now. I recognize Jerry Stein. Bill Black, I don't know. So when we get around to introducing one another, we have to kind of bring a lot of people in here that haven't been in with us in the past. I see Mike Donnelly up there in a corner
Greetings.
in the upper right. Were you, I was trying to figure out, Mike, were you from the class of 67?
Yeah,
Graduating class of 67?
yeah. I had I put down 66, but really it's 67.
Okay, so you would have been a year behind many of us.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
let's
think Bill
see.
Black and I were in the same class.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Still waiting. We got lots of names in here. Let's see. Waiting room, Bill Gebhard coming online. Oh, that's Bill Gebhard with glasses.
There you go.
Okay. Dick Gallant. Class of 65. He doesn't have his speaker on. And we got,
Man, you gotta change that name. You just don't look like a Janice.
okay, let's see here.
Hi there.
Who's,
Hi, who was that?
yeah, down here at the lower bottom, it just says phone.
My name is Russ Hogan.
Oh, okay, another
Hi, Russ.
recent addition to our last couple days.
Okay, good, good.
Hi, Russ.
Who is that?
Mike Donnelly.
Hey, Mike. Hi there.
Yeah. It's been a long time.
It's been a long time. Good to see you. You got more hair than I do.
You got more down here than I do.
There you go. Compensating, Mike.
Yeah.
Over internet and then hit start video. So you are in, there, honey.
Oh, I'm in here, okay.
Hey, Mike.
How you
Hi, Mike.
doing? Hey, good to see you. Mhm.
Mike.
This wonderful technology we can get together with.
Yep.
That's right. That's one of the blessings of the pandemic.
Yeah, well, mhm. I
Right.
think we're all a little more skilled now for it, but yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Pete.
Hey, Pete.
Hey, how are you?
We had a different meeting number or something. I was all mixed up.
Okay.
Oh, you're here now.
But I'm here now.
Let's see, I've lost count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 16 that we got online. A few more. Let's see, who haven't I seen? There we go. Oh,
There you go. There you go.
Unger, Frank Unger, yep, hasn't logged in yet, and Jerry Willing.
Oh, okay.
Jerry, come on.
Is Dave Hooper coming on?
Let's
Yeah.
do-
He said he was gonna come, but let's see. And I told people they could join at any time. So why don't we just kind of get started with the easiest part, and that is kind of going around and introducing ourselves for the benefit of those who I've been in touch with almost everybody in some way or another, but I think a lot of people haven't been in touch with one another. So let's see. Up here in the upper, why don't we start in alpha order, and I'll call the roll. Paul Banner, where are you?
Yeah.
You're muted.
There, I'm here. I'm not sure that all of us see the same order on the screen. I think our devices fill in different fashions, so.
Okay.
So I graduated from St. Joe's in '66, spent a year in Baltimore, and then left at that point. I was counseled to leave. I was counseled to take a year off, And when I walked out the door, I felt this immense release, which I didn't know I had, and knew I was not going back. But I really didn't identify with very much in the book, especially for the seminary years. I think I was, I just, I didn't find it frustrating.
Okay, on to Bill Black.
Good evening. I was in the high school and left my freshman year in college. Started in 62 and left in 67. I really liked the book. It brought back lots of memories of kind of the culture of the seminary and the school. I thought his chapter on people leaving was right on. That the kind of at the end of the year, there was always a discussion, who's coming back, who isn't. One of the things that kind of surprised me was when people left, they were gone out of the, there was kind of no correspondence. They were just gone. Very little interaction with people once they left. I think one of the hooks that wasn't talked about for getting these little kids in is that it was kind of now or you wait 6 years or 5 years or a long time. There weren't kids added every year. It was either you come in as a freshman or you have to wait a long time. I think for me, I was a people pleaser, and I found a lot of comfort and security in being with this group of people that were kind of like-minded, and it was an organized system. I think overall I enjoyed my years in the SEM. On the topic of abuse with the priests, I was never aware of any abuse among any of the faculty at St. Joe's. I always thought it was weird the way they made their tour through the locker room every day as kids were showering, but that was kind of the extent of it. That's some of my thoughts. I enjoyed the book.
Norb, how about you?
Yeah, may I suggest that we go around and just give our basic information before we get sharing on the book? Is that okay?
Fine with me.
Because I really like to respond to what Paul was talking about and share my own stuff too. But I guess I'd like to know who's here. And so for those of you who don't know, I'm legally blind, so I can't look at the screen and say, okay, there's the guys. Plus, I have not met most of you, unless you were at the reunion a couple years ago. So anyway, I went to St. Joe's in 10th grade in 1956. I'm one of the old guys in this group today. And I graduated from there in 61. And I went to Mount St. Mary's in Norwood for 1 year. And that year told me I didn't belong. And when I got home, my mom said to me, "You act like a big load has been lifted from your shoulders," and I never went back. So, and I'll share a lot more later.
Okay, how about Mike Donnelly? We haven't heard from him yet.
Okay, yeah, I'm here. I attended from 61, I think, to 66. I was a class of 67. So I went through high school there and left a year and a half into college. I left then, finished out the year at Aquinas, went down to the University of Michigan, where I've been ever since. I retired from the university about 4 years ago or something like that. So that's where I am.
Okay, I don't think George Folk has joined us. So let's, next on the list is Dick Gallant. Down here.
You're muted.
Hi, I'm Dick Galant. I graduated or completed 6 years in 65. Hi, Frank. And I'm kind of the harbinger of what was written in the book, since we were the notorious class of 3. We started out with 66. Went 6 years in St. Joe's and 1 year at St. Mary's Seminary in Baltimore, and left then and came to the University of Michigan. And basically I've been in Ann Arbor for the rest of the time. However, I had some hiatus, 2 years in the military and half a year in overseas teaching in Turkey and Italy. And I've run into Mike Donnelly a few times for the parish I attend. I think Mike's a little bit different one, but we run into each other occasionally. I think that perhaps Frank Unger and myself are in a different position than most of you, because I remember Gerald Winling and Norb. They were in, I can't remember, the 5th or 6th year. And I think actually Jerry was one of my prefects for a while. So anyways, hello to all.
All right, next on the list is Pete Garthe.
Yeah, I was there at St. Joe's for 6 years and then went 2 years Pack Street, St. Mary's in Baltimore. So finished up college there. Then went into the Peace Corps a couple of years in South America and came back to law school, Wayne State, practicing law. Still practicing a little bit. I'm still trying to retire. I'm at home now, working from home, finishing up about 20 cases. So hopefully I'll retire soon. Good to see you all again.
On to Bill Gebhard.
I also was in the group that was graduated out of St. Joe's in 66, spent 6 years at St. Joe's, and then did a year at Sacred Heart in Detroit. And that was quite an eye-opening experience, which told me I was in the wrong place, and moved on to bigger and better things. I also was in the Peace Corps for a while. I spent 4 years in the Philippines and came back, and I'm now happily unemployed, retired. And right now I'm spending my time in Florida to avoid the winters that are still gracing the great state of Michigan.
All righty, over. I don't think Jim Hammond is in yet. I haven't seen him, have I? I guess not. All right, on to Dave Hooper. We're just quickly introducing ourselves, when we were at the SEM, and anything that happened right after. Just an introduction. We're not into the book yet.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so these are introductions, you're saying?
Right.
Okay. I entered St. Joe's in 1958, so kind of right in the middle of this. And I remember sitting in study hall on the day that it was announced that Pope Pius XII had died. And I thought, in the innocent little 14-year-old mind, the church will never be the same without Pius XII. And that was prophetic and way more than I ever would have thought, but he had been the only pope of my life. So I was at St. Joe's from 58 until 64. Terry Stewart would be a classmate, Don Hayden, et cetera, et cetera. After that, I was from the Lansing Diocese. So I was sent by the diocese to Sacred Heart Seminary in Detroit for the last years of college. Graduated from there, was assigned to the North American College in Rome for 4 years, ordained in 1969. Served as a priest until for 18 years, 1988. Resigned from the priest, was married and have lived as a husband and wife, or husband and father of 3 children since then.
Okay, over to Jim Lozer.
You did.
Buddy, I was in the class of graduated from St. Joe in 1966. And after I left the seminary at that time, I finished up at Aquinas, got my BA in psychology, then went on to get my master's from Western in counseling. And then I worked for a number of years as a vocational rehabilitation counselor for the state of Michigan. And then I too decided to go to the Peace Corps. I think we all must have been enamored by John Kennedy and his encouraging us to go. I served 2 years in Malaysia. And then when I came back, I decided to finish my doctorate at Western in counseling psychology, and actually began private practice in probably around 1970. I've stopped private practice as a psychologist about 3 or 4 years ago, but I continue to work as a vocational expert for the Social Security Disability Program. I testify on the phone. They're actually having their hearings, everything on the phone now due to the COVID situation. So still able to do that. I enjoyed the book, and I'd look forward to talking about it a little later.
Okay, Frank Marfia just entered the room.
Yes, I'm
Frank,
sorry I'm late.
At this point, we're just kind of doing a round of introducing ourselves when we were at the seminary and just like what happened after that. We're going to look at the book itself in a more detailed
minute, yeah.
introductions.
Okay, my name is Franklin Marfia, Frank. I was in the class of, we started in September of 60. I finished the whole minor seminary, graduated in May of 66 with most of you, and then went 2 more years to Assumption Seminary, the major seminary in San Antonio, Texas. Monsignor Moran asked for 2 volunteers to go to Texas, hopefully so that we would learn Spanish. There was a sizable migrant population in Western Michigan, Spanish-speaking migrant population. So I actually enjoyed my career in the seminary. We're going to get into that later, right? There were parts of it I didn't like. And I'm hoping we touch upon something that happened in April or May of 66, right at the end of my minor seminary career. Something eventful happened that I'll try to explain when we get into the book. I worked 25 years for the Head Start program. I was a federal employee for about 35 years total, 10 years for Social Security, 25 for Head Start. It was the best job of all my working career, working for Head Start. It was really a program that had a lot of meat in it, provided tremendous help to low-income families. And some of the agencies I was the federal representative were in, most of them were in Michigan, quite a few were in Ohio. I got to travel a lot as a federal employee. I actually went to Alaska. I did a review in Alaska. I did a couple tribal reviews. I did New York City twice with 100 people that I was responsible for when I did New York City. So at the end of my career, I got a much more responsibility in some of these federal visits that we did. I really enjoyed those 25 years in Head Start. I retired in 2012, and my wife and I built a summer home in northern Wisconsin, and we've been going back and forth between Chicago and Wisconsin actually for 40 years. We were renting a place up there. So that's my story. Who's next?
Okay, Mike Murphy.
Okay. Well, here goes, sir. Class of 66. I guess most of you guys are. That's who I see here. Lived near Lansing, retired from the advertising business. I was a copywriter and I enjoyed it. It's almost a license to steal, except that I never told a lie. Okay. But there was good years there. My wife and I married 52 years and counting. I've got two sons, both professionals, grandchildren, which keep me busy. And I spent a couple of years in the Army, way back then. They decided from my seminary education that I could pick up foreign languages really well, so they taught me Chinese. Anyway, that's me.
Okay, on to Stas.
I'm Stas Popowhich, class of 66. Zibby and I left that year, June. Saw some of you guys like Jerry Stein, who else? McKenna, on some vacations and stuff. I joined the Air Force, and that's a 4-year hitch. And I was sent to Syracuse University to learn Russian language, and then back to Texas for radio school. I was sent to Turkey. I stayed there for about 15 months, and then got sent to northern Japan. In northern Japan, there's a lot of snow. The one year I was there, we had like about 350 inches of snow. When you got off the plane, being assigned there, they took you to headquarters and you signed in. They took you to the warehouse and gave you a parka. And you needed that parka. And the wind blew every day, anywhere from 7 to 25 miles an hour every day. It did get somewhat warm, never went swimming, but very interesting place to live. Right down the road from us was a concentration camp for Americans. And some of the people I was working with actually met some of the locals who were their guards while they were imprisoned. Went to Michigan State when I got out, got a BA in psychology, and then went to Michigan for social work, got a master's in social work. Did some child guidance for about 3 years, and then went to an intermediate school district here and was in a group that evaluated children under age 3 for special ed. And I retired about 10 years ago. And then it took me a while to relax, but I'm enjoying it now. My hobbies were basically racing sailboats, and I've done a lot of that over the years and plan on doing it again this year. So.
On to Jerry Stein.
Jerry Stein, I'm also a great class of 1966, graduating from St. Joe Seminary. I, along with Stas and a few others, left after 66, headed up to Central Michigan University and graduated from there in 68 with a Bachelor of Arts in Education and English major, Latin minor. I wonder where I got that Latin minor. But picked up another degree at Western Michigan University and taught high school English at Thornapple Kellogg in Middleville High School for 35 years, and retired from there. Married to Regina, whom I met at the campus at the Catholic campus at Central Michigan. John Porter was there at that time. Somebody else was there. We've been married 51 years, and we also have 2 children and 4 grandkids. We live in DeWitt, just a few miles from Mike Murphy, and we sure hope to get together this summer, and with Pete and some of the
Sure,
others.
as soon as they let us do it.
Yeah, you bet. Okay.
And on to Frank Unger. We haven't heard from Frank.
Well, I was with Richard Gallant in the class of 65 and got out of there, and we went to St. Mary's in Baltimore. And he and I were the last 2 members that started in 1959 with 66 students. So there was nothing out of our year. I did graduate from St. Mary's and went in the service. When I got out of that, I tried 2-3 things until I graduated from Grand Valley with a master's program in accounting and finance. And basically, I specialized in cost and setting up accounting systems for companies. And that's about it. Okay, so the next person, if there is one, you know.
Yeah, Al Wahmhoff.
Yeah. I also went to Baltimore, Maryland after the St. Joe's, and then on to St. John's Seminary for 3 years there. Just before I would have been ordained a deacon, my family needed some help. My dad had been off a couple of years with a broken leg, and my mother, who was old enough, was pregnant with baby sister coming. So I decided that I better get up, take a year off, and earn some money. So I retired, if you want to call it that, to my summer job of construction surveyor on a nuclear power plant. That particular year, if you got hired in being a federal job, you could be employed if they went on strike. So I got out of there just before the strike. As it turned out, they didn't strike, but anyway, I decided to take the year off or more, and history, I worked 46 years doing survey work on construction sites, nuclear power plants, petroleum refineries, roads, high rises, everything.
I don't think Jerry Willing is here, so I'm up next. I was, like so many others, did the full 6 years at St. Joe's, left in 1966. And from there went down to Detroit, where I thought nobody on the west side of the state would ever get down to Detroit. So I went to Wayne State for the 2 years, finished up with a bachelor's in '68, got into teaching. And while I was going to teaching, I was going to graduate school, got my master's in history, taught for 9 years, and then got involved in running human service, community service programs, and raising money for them. So my background was in PR, program development, and fundraising. And along the way became very interested in information technology and how especially small to mid-size organizations could use it in their work. So I'm pretty much retired right now, although I still do some contract work for social media. And that kind of got me into doing the alumni website and all that other stuff. So that's me. And I think the last person fittingly on the list here is Joe Sheley. So why don't you give us a quick update?
Well, thanks. There is somebody with the phone number there. Did we miss that person?
You missed me, Pete. Thank you. Russ Hogan.
That? Oh, Russ. Okay.
Yeah.
You see
Can
him?
I go?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Okay. Thanks for that, Pete. I'm grateful.
Sure.
It's not the only time I was left out in my life. But I have to say too, I've experienced a real different feeling just here in these first few minutes of kind of coming home in a way. It makes me think a lot about how important that time was in my life. And it's just interesting to be with a bunch of guys who were part of that. So I was at St. Joe's from 61 to 64, freshman through junior year. My older brothers had been there too. My oldest brother, Doug, and my next oldest brother, Mike, were both there before me. So I left in 64, went to Aquinas, taught high school for a while after that, got a master's at Western, then I got a PhD at Michigan State in psychology. So my wife and I have been in a small private practice for 30 years. I'm sort of semi-retired now and liking it a lot. So I'm glad to be here, and I'm grateful to Joe for being here, the author of the book, and also grateful to you, Bill, for setting this up, and you, Norm, for thinking about this. So good to be here with you guys.
I have one question. Was Jim Hannock in the class of 66?
Yes,
Yeah.
he was.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and he passed on taking part tonight, as did I contacted Dick Host, and he's not going to be available as well. So over to Joe Sheley.
All right.
I think I'm on target now.
I think you got them. It's a good thing they have names under every picture, because that was a lot of guys I was being introduced and introducing themselves to each other. I wrote the book for things like this. It wasn't, I didn't start out, and I hope I didn't come across doing some kind of big expose. I simply wanted to confront a number of issues, experiences, histories, personal, that, as I said in the book, I packed away in a box and stuck it way up in the closet, and didn't realize the extent to which the last speaker with the phone number, not the name, noted that, that was a rich experience, and it had a lot of effects, good and bad. And I, for a number of reasons, did not or had not dealt with it. And then as I got into my 40s, it started to become apparent that I should. And personally, confronting it was a really good thing. Working my way through it, I was, as you read in the book, a parental sacrifice. I went to the seminary because of my mom. There's no doubt about it. She did it. She wasn't just supportive, she rigged the whole damn thing. God bless her. But I needed to deal with that. I needed to deal with the effects of something I left and never went back to. Once I was done with that, I started to ask myself, wonder if other former seminarians also feel somewhat the way I feel, or a lot the way I feel, or the other, not at all like I feel. And I started to do interviews. I'm a sociologist, a researcher by education and training, and I started doing those interviews. And I found that there was, in fact, a tremendous number of shared patterns, not all of them the same. And the common response to the book is, well, it didn't quite capture me. Well, yeah, that would be pretty hard to do. My goal was to try to get a framework that captured a lot and allowed people to have conversations like this and try to figure out, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and try to figure out the effects and how they feel about that concept of minor seminary in the end. And I don't hide it in the book. I actually loved lots of my time there. By the same token, you'll never hear from me that concept was a good concept. Taking kids and putting them in schools like that, no matter how well intended the process was, nor
what a great education we got. And my bet is nearly every one of you will say that we did, in part because we all ended up being able to write well. And that's the key generally to success in most fields. Then when I was done with the interviews and saw the patterns, I wondered if I could contribute something to what is on the one hand vast, but nonetheless a fairly small literature in terms of trying to put all the things in the book, including the history part of the minor seminary, so that, it came together. And it seems to have. I've done several of these kinds of meetings. I love them. I love hearing everybody's different take on things. And that's what I'm expecting from questions tonight. And again, hey, I was a university president. My skin is thicker than a tree stump. So I don't worry too much about how people felt about the book. I just like to hear it, and I kind of commit it to memory, and I go back and look, and I end up saying, hey, he's right. That was a little too vague. I should have been a little sharper on that part. So let me close before I get back to you guys and tell you, yesterday I got a postcard, an email in the mail. And it was, or on my computer, what am I saying? I had sent, in order to try to get the book out to seminarians, and it's not a very easy group to reach. I had sent I did a lot of work with Facebook, and I have sent hundreds of postcards announcing the book. And I had sent one to a guy who lives 400 miles north of me here in Sacramento. And I hadn't seen him since our sophomore year in high school. He left at the end of it. His name was Tim, and he pretty much disappeared. He was a very popular guy, a great athlete, very nice guy. He just flat disappeared. So it's been almost 60 years. And he responded back yesterday. He said, I have bought the book. I am starting to read it. He said, I really had to wrestle with myself to get myself to go there, because at 73 years of age, I've never had a conversation with anybody about my seminary time. Barely with my spouse. And there are parts of that time that I really regret and parts not, but overall it was not an experience that I wanted to use my terms, unpack from the box. And I wrote back to him, and it was kind of a dark email, I hope, though I would say there's a good chance reading it, it was a little dark, and it seemed this guy might have been a sexual abuse victim. I've just got a hunch maybe, and I'll eventually see. We'll talk, I'm sure. But that kind of exchange, and whatever he ends up telling me after he reads the book, now that he's committed to doing it, is what this was about. And to the extent my book can foster conversations, both with you guys now or you guys later, you guys amongst yourselves, that was the point. It sure wasn't for the money, because you don't sell many books quite this specialized. But it was instead to meet guys like you and get the conversation started. So I'll let it go at that. And Bill, if you're moderating, however you're doing it, I'll answer whatever questions and listen to whatever conversations go back and forth amongst you guys.
Oh, could we first have your dates and locations?
Yeah.
Like when you're in the seminary, then what afterwards?
I was in from 61 through 67, a 6-year minor sem.
Where was that? Where was that?
Oh, I'm sorry. That was at a school called St. Pius X Seminary, and it was just outside of Sacramento for the Sacramento Diocese, and it was in a small rural town called Galant, California. I left after that 6th year. I did not move on, and whoever noted that they had 3 people left in class. I think our class started somewhere in the mid 50s and ended up moving about 6 guys on to major. And 2 of them ultimately were ordained, which meant that was an exceptionally expensive per priest production. But I then went on, I went to college at Sacramento State, went on to University of Massachusetts for my PhD in sociology, went from there to New Orleans, where I taught at Tulane University for 21 years. And then quite coincidentally, I kind of, in my late 40s, kind of hit a ceiling where I was getting tired of doing the same thing. I went into it, started looking at administrative possibilities, and lo and behold, I end up at my alma mater in Sacramento. And I was there in various capacities for, I guess, 16 years, and then went 90 miles down the road as president of California State University Stanislaus. And it was from there I retired in 2016, and I'll be straight up, I have not looked back. I have had a great time, other than COVID, and other than wanting to get a haircut one of these days. I have been very happy in retirement. Does that help you? Give you a little background?
Yeah, thanks.
All right, why don't we go back in our old alpha order? Go back to Paul Banner. There were some people who joined after you had initially made your first round of comments. So why don't we'll start over again with you. You got to put your unmute you.
There. And for those who missed it, Norb taught us that if we're muted and we press the space bar, it unmutes us, so you don't have to toggle back and forth if you're good at holding the space bar down. I'm just heavy-handed right now. So, and I don't know whether Bill explained to you, Joe, that most of us were in this class from 1960 to 1966. Some dropped out a little earlier. Many of us went on into 1 to 2 years of philosophy. Very few of us went on into theology, but so, and this group got started, Bill kind of kicked it off as a reunion of the class, just sharing where we've gone. We've been involved in 2 or 3 reunions over the years. I think I only caught one of them, but I'm and there really isn't anything particularly pertinent about that. I struggled over a decision to it was a decision to leave the seminary. Maybe it was I wasn't satisfied with what I was doing, how the vocation was fulfilling what I was looking for. I felt that I was kind of backward, a little bit narrow-minded. When we went to St. Mary's in Baltimore, my perception was most of these classmates from up and down the East Coast had a much broader perspective about where they fit in to their society as seminarians. I'm a farm boy, and I had a little bit of a sense of being, fairly narrow-minded, although I also was a pretty smart kid. So that was a conflict. But as things worked through the year, one of I guess my biggest inspiration was Gino Walsh, and about halfway through that junior year, I managed to get switched to him as a spiritual director, and I don't recall what specific types of stuff that we discussed over time, but he was a kind of an inspirational old priest who he ran much of the music program at St. Mary's at that point. And he, and I don't think it's describing him unfairly, that he encouraged us as students to be open and to that liturgical celebration should be an open and invigorating exercise. But as we got to the end of that year, I had done some counseling with Dr. Kreins, and I think that some of the rest of us had encounters with him. He helped me a lot, but Gino said, well, when you get back to Kalamazoo, look him up and do some more counseling with him, which I did. And as things progressed, he said, you need to take a year off. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. And we argued back and forth, but he convinced me to take a year off. And I arranged that with Monsignor Moran, and I was working in Grand Rapids that summer, but I was staying at the seminary. And Kreins said, and you're taking a year off, and you're leaving the building. So I followed directions and moved in with 2 or 3 or 4 of our classmates who were living in a house in kind of the ghetto of Grand Rapids downtown. But as I walked out down the steps, I said to myself, I'm not going back. I have no reason to go back. And this there was an uplifting feeling that that I felt at that point going forward. If you don't want, if you want me to stop, I can be long-winded, so don't hesitate to stop me. But I found a community that I kind of built along as we had stepped out, that I was had been doing some counseling, friendship, one sort or another, with one of the young priests in the diocese at that point. And he got me involved with some of the older youth people in his parish. So there might have been 2 or 3 years, between us, but and then I got into Grand Valley that fall. There was, a lot of adjustment, coping in, shyness and being, some social skills were a little weak. I was very intellectual, but that all kind of went together. And over time, I continued. I had ongoing relationship with some of the priests, and as they became ordained. I grew up in Martin, so halfway to Kalamazoo from Grand Rapids. Joe, there really is a Kalamazoo.
I know.
It's a great place. It's and so Chuck Fisher and I were good friends from the seminary. That Chuck was a sacristan. I was a sacristan. Frank was a sacristan for a year.
Yeah.
And that friendship has continued. It's kind of sporadic, but when we see each other, the bond is there. And Mike Hazard is a good friend from way back, because our folks carpooled our laundry back and forth from Kalamazoo to Martin to Grand Rapids. And I'll pass it on from there, but I guess my one, I felt like I had got a good education from the seminary, but I wish I'd had more sophisticated science, which is kind of contradicted to what you're doing in a seminary type of orientation.
Okay, how about Bill Black? I'm going alphabetically.
So one of the things that I was thinking about was that as high school kids coming in, these young kids coming into the seminary, I don't remember kind of ever sitting down and talking and having conversations with a spiritual director, or kind of conferences with the priests about the vocation. It seemed like we were on this train that was kind of going to, the destination was the priesthood, but this long ride on this train was our life. It was kind of the train ride was what was important. And I don't remember kind of any direction as far as discussions with priests about where this is leading, what the priesthood is really all about. Any comments on that?
I'll give you one or two. I agree completely. And I was a really good kid and I was focused. That said, nope, there was never any conversation about where we were going. And I don't know about you guys, but I spent the majority of my life thinking that I made all of those decisions as a 12-year-old kid. How could you understand really any of that? And as I've interviewed others and as I've read, it finally became clearer to me that it really was a 2, sometimes 3, depending on how they structure the education, but basically a 2-step process. And at least the high school, if not the 2 years of college that most of us got in the minor sem. And a lot of people, I liked my classes, by the way, but I do understand when I hear people say they were 2 more years of high school. It wasn't about the classes, it was about the social part of it. And by then my class was down to 10 or 11 people. But what became clear as I talked to others and did a lot of reading over the last several years was something that I guess should have been obvious. I wasn't supposed to be worrying about what a priest did. That wasn't my job. I was going to get either moved out or moved on. And it was in round 2, the moved on, that the idea was you start to understand. And that's why a lot of people, a couple of you tonight said you hit the wall when you moved on. It's the first time really we had a concept of where all this was going. And the last piece is several people, and you just said it, Bill, yourself to a degree, the vocation was the seminary. The seminary wasn't the key to a vocation. Almost everybody thought of the seminary as they didn't have the term, but as their vocation. And it was, as one of my interviewees said, it wasn't until I got to the major seminary and even got to be just about a deacon when I realized, oh, wait a second, I'm not going to the seminary, I'm going to be a priest. I want out of here. And that's when he made his move out. But it hadn't really occurred to him. The goals were get through minor sem, the goal was ordination. Even in major seminary, most of the people I interviewed said there wasn't enough discussion about where all this was going. I hope that's changed now. For major seminarians, there aren't very many minor seminaries left, about 4 in the country. And they sadden me because I look at what they do and they haven't changed in 60 years. There's still 2 of them have. 2 of them are just like the ones that we went to. And the difference is they now take junior high school kids. So they aren't even getting 13-year-olds. They're getting 11-year-olds who will be 12 sometime in that year. It just makes me very sad. Not because I'm anti-church, anti-Catholic, anti-priest, any of the above. I guess I'd feel the same way had I been shipped off to military school. I mean, the point is, kids don't make those decisions, and it is an environment that doesn't encourage growth in decision making, especially in our era as Catholic young guys. It was far more a matter of learn the rules, follow the rules, and someday when you're a priest, you can even help explain the rules. But that was that's too many 1, 2, 3 answers I was going to give to you. I'm probably up to about 7 now. So why don't I quit and we move on to the next guy and ask another question. But thanks for the question.
Next guy is Nora Bufka.
All right. I've been waiting for this moment. It's this, even tonight, this is very emotional. I represent an older generation, kind of. Generation is too long, strong a word probably, but I graduated in '61 when most of you guys were first year. So it was a different era. The seminary was changing, and during that time period, my class had somewhere between 80 and 100. We never have been able to figure out all of them that were in the class. And we graduated with 21 from St. Joe's, and 6 of them were ordained. And 4 of them left the priesthood. 2 of them remained until retirement. But back to my experience, I also grew up on a farm in northern Lower Michigan, went to actually a one-room school for kindergarten, then went to the big school at Leland, which had 9 kids in my class. And then I went to seminary. It was a shock for me. The one thing that was constant, I had all brothers. And so I went to seminary where they're all boys. So that was not unusual for me, but I was terribly homesick for a couple of months. Then I really got into it. I could really relate to what Joe and was saying about the goal was to graduate. And I can tell you that my graduation was one of the happiest days of my life. And yet after I left and reflected on it, I had all these negative feelings about St. Joe's. And I wondered what the heck is going on. And I finally, at one of our reunions, Jim Swiat, who was a classmate of mine and one of those who were ordained, commented on the oppressive nature of the seminary life. And it validated for me what I was experiencing, but wasn't able to verbalize. And the best way I can, and then I researched St. Joe's and wrote my book about it. And that was a cathartic experience for me because it helped me realize the joys that I had there and put it all in perspective. I was shocked when I learned what you guys went through with Vatican II and the few years after that. I just had no idea that's what happened at St. Joe's. And I don't know where I would have been on that, but the seminary reinforced everything that I learned at home and in my parish about the church and life. I knew I had all the answers, all the right ones, by the way, for years. It took me, I did not adjust to Vatican II right away. And my friends are surprised when they hear me say that, because I'm way beyond Vatican II now. But it was, life for me was, I had tried to deal with all this. I'm trying to summarize it now in a few short ideas. One is, it gave me tremendous advantage in my education, because growing up on the farm, I doubt I would have ever gone to college. But by being in a seminary, I had the academic training and the ability to study. And after I left the seminary, I went to Aquinas and got my BA. Courses were so easy for me. And it was because I knew how to study. I knew how to prepare. And then I went on and got a master's in Latin, of all things. And then later in life, I got a master's in pastoral studies from Loyola University. So I was your neighbor there, Joe.
Yeah.
Although I didn't do it on campus, it was distance learning. And so that was the really positive thing. Another positive thing was the friendship. Even though we were told not to have particular friendships, and I did not have particular friendship, these classmates, and 2 of them I thought were going to join us tonight, are very dear friends. And I have probably half a dozen from my class that I consider very close friends. But they weren't all those 60 years. There were many years we didn't see each other. So that was a benefit. But it finally came to conclusion, the negative part was the isolation. And I lost my teenage years. I went from a 14-year-old, 15-year-old going to the seminary to a 21-year-old. And I didn't know how to act in the world. And some of my classmates, I remember one of my classmates telling me he really loved the discipline there. It really taught him to be self-disciplined. It had the opposite effect on me. Without the rules, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go with my future. And I finally ended up getting an education degree, not education. I ended up teaching for 7 years, and then I went into sales and then back in pastoral ministry my last 9 years. But what was I going to say about that? My year at St. Mary's in Norwood and Cincinnati, I was wearing a cassock and collar every day, if you remember. Major seminary, you did that. And I think that really brought home to me where I was going. And so, Joe, in your book, when you said our goal in the minor seminary was to graduate or just to be there, I could really relate to that. And I guess I don't have a question exactly, but it just share my experience, and it's a little bit different. Maybe not any different. Oh yeah, I want to say one more thing. When I read your book, and you talked about setting up St. Pius X seminary, not you, but the diocese, and the rules and the guidelines. My God, it was like going to St. Joe's. The rules were the same. I could experience what you were going through just by my own experience. And by the time you other guys got to St. Joe's, rules had relaxed quite a bit. Even while I was there, they did, as a matter of fact. We could actually smoke at St. Henry's. Not that I smoked, but most of my class did. And that was absolutely forbidden at seminary. So that was one of the things that got relaxed. So that's my story. And I'm really happy to be here to hear your stories and to share this with you and resonate with each other and, keep the faith or whatever, be safe. That's the phrase nowadays, isn't it? Thank you.
About Mike Donnelly.
Okay, I think I've unmuted.
Yep.
I enjoyed a lot of my time at the seminary. It was a mixed blessing, though. Emotional immaturity, I think, was a significant part of my life, and I don't think the seminary helped me at all in that regard. I enjoyed the academics, not the sciences, but the arts and the letters and so on. And I to this day, I bore my kids to tears with Latin derivations and Greek vocabulary and things like that. But as I think it was Bill was saying, there was no discernment process going on, no vocational development, nothing like that would help me to move from a vague, amorphous kind of, I'd like to be a priest, to this is what it's all about, and this is why, and this is how you know that this is what's for you. So I didn't latch on. I went through the paces. I was there for 5.5 years, but it was an environment that I was in. It wasn't a vocation that I was responding to. And ultimately, I essentially went over the fence and left by going on a date with a girl from Aquinas. And Father Rose is the one who opened the door to let me back in. Not my confederate, who was supposed to be the one to leave the door unlocked. But no turning back.
Yeah. How about Dick Gallant? Dick?
Yes.
Okay, you're up.
Joe, one of the things that I did, and this was in 1972. I was in Baltimore, and by the way, Paul Banner, Father Walsh was my confessor. So the decision to leave there was through him. I remember he said you should leave, and I did. And I figured it was a volatile time because it was the draft. And I went anyways because I felt that I didn't want to cheat the seminary. However, one of the things that I did, and when I went to the University of Michigan, and I really wanted to go there. I mean, almost all my life because of education. And regarding, the part where the mother plays a big influence, I think a lot of, and I'm responding to Joe a little bit, I've read half the book, but a lot of the, my going probably was influenced by my mother, who had an Irish background. My father was Polish. But I didn't feel a lot of the things that you had mentioned, but maybe I didn't know what was going on. I was kind of naive about that. But the interesting thing is that in writing this paper, it was for a sociology class. And it was kind of well, it focused on deviance. And the person, since you're a professor, Joe, you may know of him. I think he was at Stanford. His name is Matza.
David.
David
Matza.
David Matza.
Yeah.
So I wrote about it from the perspective, and my theme was, and Joe and I have never talked or anything like that. I mean, I'm glad that he's did what he's done. Young men who saw visions. And I just kind of describe in this paper how I, and there's some sentiments that have been shared, but it was, I felt kind of by myself in making decisions. And do I regret it? No, I felt that I was taught that if I make the decision, and that's why I made the issue that when I left St. Mary's, it was my decision. I had told my parents the year before that when I got son at St. Joe's that I don't know whether I want to stay or not, but they said, well, give it a year. And I went into it that way. A couple of instances that's one's kind of, both are kind of noteworthy, but who just mentioned, I don't know, it was Mike or somebody, that in Baltimore, you had to wear, both the times I was outside the seminary grounds and we were free to go. The first time, it's the kid from the Midwest who's never been anywhere. And I think Paul's observation about the attitude of the people that are my classmates, they seemed a little bit more with it than I did. But anyways, I was walking, there's a couple instances that were kind of, I think had an impression on me. We had to wear black hats, and this was September in Washington, DC. I was so excited, you've never seen this. And we had a black suit and we wore a collar and all that good stuff. And I'm walking into the steps that go to Arlington Cemetery. Cemetery. And this couple is coming at me and they're well dressed and the woman is crying. So I thought, well, they probably are seeing, they just came from the funeral of their son. But she stopped in the middle of that and she said, "Good afternoon, Father." That just blew me away. Here I am 20 years old to think about that. Then a little bit later that day, we were walking from the Lincoln Memorial along the reflection pool. And there was nobody there except this couple. And this woman was sitting she had a kind of a quasi bathing suit and she had a cover. She just had a bra and she had a, I don't know, cover thing. And she's kind of sitting like this. And we're walking there and we walked by her and they were like in the middle of the pool. And she said, "Oh, good afternoon, Father." But she sat up and kind of covered herself. But again, it's all the impact of what you talk about your vocation. The other one, and this is when I was still in Baltimore, this is right around Christmas time. And it happened, we were there, we were out down on the main street of Baltimore, and I love sports. I really love sports my whole life. And we're walking and there's this crowd across the street. We're on the main street of Baltimore. And it happens that it was Muhammad Ali. And this was at the time when he was at his controversy with the war and everything. And I decided out of the clear blue, and I had my black hat on and my, my Rabbi and all the other good stuff. And I was at a street corner in downtown Baltimore, and I asked for his autograph. And here's this man standing in front of me, and we were, like mano a mano. The only thing I got out of this, I'd never want to fight that guy. But the thing is, I'll never forget it. The look on his face I described as he was just beautiful. I mean, he was like an Adonis. But he just signed it, and I still have it, Ali. And then he walked on. But it made an incredible impression on me, how he handled the whole situation, and then kind of the afterwards. And then that was my time, and that wasn't all the time I was in Baltimore, but I began to ask more questions about life because we were trying to, or I was trying to, just understand, and we're being taught philosophy, and it kind of opened up things a lot more to me about life. And after I left, I ended up going to the University of Michigan, as I said, and at the time when it was one of the more radical places in the United States. Gerald Willing can share a lot with her. I didn't know he was there at that time, but then I left that in about 3 years, and then I went into the Army, and then I came back. But I went through like 3 incredible episodes. I was in a seminary, cloistered, and as I reflect on it now, as we were kind of like mini monks, at least at St. Joe's, and our, everything was prescribed and everything, and the church kind of lives that way. And then I go into the most radical, or one of the more radical thinking venues and environments in the United States, and then I go into the U.S. Army. But one of the things that I discovered when you talk about, I started this with about deviance and that I found more camaraderie, sorry everyone, in the Army than I did in the seminary, in any experience I'd ever had, because I was seeking, just being with everyone. A part of it was that in going through, all I remember about the experience, besides hopefully some of the knowledge passed on, is the fact that, you started with 66 and every year it was less and less, and where'd everybody go? Am I next? And in the Army, and in the seminary, we were supposedly all going for the same goal. But in the Army, everybody, didn't matter what their backgrounds were, we all knew what the goal was: to survive. And it didn't matter what their backgrounds were. And also, I think it taught me about, and something I want to know, of how to interact with people that don't see the world as I do, and in how I had been taught. Now, with that, I also, in leaving the seminary, was the idea of leaving. You kind of felt like a loser, if you will, in trying to get over that. And you kind of felt kind of like the third thumb or something like that, if you will, as far as your experience, and there is one thing, the amount of knowledge. And one of the things that I am most amazed at is that Frank Unger and I, the others I know, except for one or two that I can remember here, and I can tell you what parish they might have gone to, or where they're from, and that's very important for me. But the first person that I met at the seminary was Frank Unger. And what happened was that we had to take a special test, and we had a big study hall, and that was the kind of the big gathering place in a way for us. And he asked me a question as we were taking the exam. He asked me a question about the instructions. And I'll never forget that. And I got so darn scared because, you didn't want to be caught talking while you're taking your test. And after they left the seminary, we both of us went to St. Mary's in Baltimore. He went one more year. We continued our correspondence. He went to Korea, and I wrote to him. And one time, it was interesting, I stopped to see him. He lives about 60 miles from us, from me. And I remember he met his wife, and she said, well, is he okay? And Frank said, yeah, he's fine. But one of the things that's interesting too is based on the experience is that I could go to any of these people that you see here, and we could start talking as if nothing happened the next day. I mean, like nothing had happened in the long hiatus. And knowing I've kind of communicated more lately with Frank, although I've been kind of neglectful. He's had some really incredible challenges that he's gone through. But I often wonder if, it's kind of hinted at, that the preparation really helped us in making decisions, and the rigidness of the rule, and what does it mean to live a Christian life? As I said, you were taught to be a monk, but you're not going to be in that habitat for the rest of your life, even if you're a priest. How do you make those decisions? I think were I a priest today, I would have a lot of conscious problems with the problems that we face in our society, and so many issues. And would I be, how would I be seen by those that judge me, if you will? And I'm talking about like the bishops and all the, your peers and that. And so it was interesting that in the paper I wrote, and how I've tried to, after leaving the seminary, based on all of the background that I received there, is very much consistent. I've only read half the book, how you describe things, Joe. But, and I found it interesting that you were a sociologist.
Yeah.
By the way, for Pete Garthe and the rest, that for whatever reason, I decided to read your bio somehow on the internet. And Joe has had incredible praise for his work when he went to Stanislaus, I believe, and what he's done with the community. And I feel that others here, going in the Peace Corps, and how the seminary really did help you. But I think the people that you worked with really miss you. So that's what the impression I got from the internet. So there might be a few, but but still. But that's what I'd want to share with you, the fact that it's trying all through the time that to just to adjust to that, to the, like not feeling a failure because you left. There is only one other thing that is a mystery to me, and this is alluded to, is when I was in the seminary, I could never get an A in English. Every time I wrote, Father Zaskowski had put an 88, but I didn't know what the heck that meant. However, the first paper I wrote at the University of Michigan in English, I got an A. And it was like consistently getting A's. And I often wondered if that part of the reason is the fact that they were reading the papers and judging them on the fact that, maybe I was in quotes too radical or something. I don't really know, but I do know that how you write things and everything are a profound expression of your own inner feelings, whatever you write about in a lot of ways. So anyways, I'll share that with you, and I hope I didn't bore you too much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, on to Pete and then to Bill Gebhard.
Well, I'm Norwegian and very laconic, so I'm not going to take up a lot of time, and I will yield to the gentlemen from the other areas, especially those who have read the book and do want to ask questions of Joe. I was curious about Mike Donnelly, though. He said did he say he went over the fence to meet a girl? And haven't we talked how many times about the barbed wire in that fence was facing inwards? I'm curious.
It was figurative. I went out the front door.
Okay.
It was locked when I got back.
Okay. Anyway, St. Joe's in a nutshell. I basically enjoyed it. I was, just so busy all the time, and Dave Hooper was my hero and my idol, and we were in the ath department and scheduling games and all that. Took up all our time and just kind of cruised through. Baltimore St. Mary's was a different matter. That was really the experience. Boy, those 2 years there. And I had Father Eugene Walsh as my spiritual director also. We called him God. Quite a man, though, really quite a man. He's written several books on liturgy and all of that, and I have all those books. But anyway, that 1968 was just the most phenomenal year, I think, in my life. It was just an explosive year. It was just a lot of turmoil and chaos. And anyway, that was the year I left there and went off into the real world. And anyway, I enjoyed my seminary life. I don't know if I was screwed up too much or not. I feel I'm okay, and I enjoyed it and got a lot out of it and made a lot of friends, as you all have said. So I will just yield to the rest of you who have more in-depth questions.
Okay, on to Bill Gebhard and then Dave Hooper.
All right. Well, I think I would echo some of the things that have been said. I think St. Joe's, from my experience, we didn't have to really think about what we were doing. That everything was laid out pretty much. There was a master schedule, and you knew where you were going to be from 1 minute to the next, and there wasn't a whole lot of discussion or that we were called upon to even think about why are you here? What are you going to be doing? And so it was fairly easy to I guess, hey, if you want to follow the schedule and more or less follow the rules, not all of the rules, not all of the time, but St. Joe's was that kind of an experience. But then when I got to Sacred Heart, all bets were off. Things changed dramatically in the major seminary. I mean, we were allowed to leave, and 2 or 3 months into my stay there, they went through and asked, if we wanted to go on a cursillo, and all of a sudden, we spent some of us went off and spent 3 days not sleeping, and there were girls there, and you were talking with the opposite sex, and it was like, holy crap, this is different. And we weren't supposed to know that they existed, but I noticed, and that kind of got me thinking along those other lines. And as I say, after 1 year at Sacred Heart, I decided, my eyes have been opened, and I needed to do something else. And so I left the seminary, and I ended up going into the Peace Corps. And wouldn't you know it, my Peace Corps ended up to be an all-guy group. I mean, I left one all-guy group for another all-guy group. And, you know, it was like, I can't catch a break. But yeah, one of the reasons that I went, it said, well, your first week is going to be at a nudist camp in California. Damn, you know, ended up that the nudists had all gone and it was an all-guy group. It was like, this is just not going to work. But anyway, and again, that whole thing, the seminary was kind of a selection or a deselection process that you went through it. And our attrition rate, what did we start with? About 82?
86.
I think it was either 86 or 88. I remember.
Okay, maybe 88. Maybe that's the other number I remember. But, you know, and through attrition, it was, you know, trying to hold on. And then, you know, Peace Corps ended up being the same way. You know, we started with like 80 guys and it just kept working its way down. And lo and behold, 20 of us ended up as volunteers. Sounds quite a bit like what we did in the seminary. But anyway, it's I'll stop there and let others get involved. But I've only just recently started the book, but I find it to be interesting, and I can relate to some of the things that are being said. So I look forward to finishing that.
Hey, Bill, did you go to training in Escondido, California?
We did have the nudist camp was in Escondido.
Yeah, that's where I had my Peace Corps training. Former nudist camp.
Yep. Well, they moved us. We were only there for a week, and then they moved us to. Then they said we were going to Hawaii for 2 months of our training, and we think, oh, Hawaii, hot damn, we did it again. Put us on the island of Molokai. The only thing on Molokai was the leprosarium and pineapple.
I'm kind of curious, for the folks that went to the Peace Corps, do you find that has left a bigger impact on your personal life than the seminary?
For me, I would say yes. I met my wife there.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting question. Yeah, it's certainly very impactful, sir. Sure.
Well, could I jump in for a sec? You know, that question has come up a lot for me from people that I've been talking to. And the answer almost always is the same one that Bill just gave. Yes, it wasn't necessarily because of marriage, but anything I think that brings you into especially if you're not an adolescent, you're beyond that, you're a young adult, anything that gets you that involved and has that level of camaraderie tends, I think, to eclipse the effects of what we've been through before, including seminary time. And several of the guys, I was always jealous of you guys who went to the Peace Corps. I would have died to go to the Peace Corps. And a lot of my friends, just a couple years older than I, went. And before they talk about the SEM, they always talk about the Peace Corps, I noticed. It was very impactful. The other group that tends, when I talk to them or listen to them when they get together, are combat vets. Combat vets talk about combat. That had the biggest impact, obviously, on their lives. But if you look at the way they relate to each other, instead of telling adolescent stories like when you put a dead rabbit in somebody's bed, they tell other similar stories. And you just look at them and go, you guys were serious. You make us look like nothing. But I think it's the quality of the interaction and the shared vision and the notion of moving forward. And the last part, the couple of you have been in the Peace Corps can say it or not, is there's a reason you're in there. You're going to make a difference, whatever that is. But it's what I always wanted to do. So you've already got me big time jealous just standing here, just listening to you talk. But I have found that a lot. That must have been a tremendous experience.
Yeah, you know, Joe, I can certainly agree with that. I think that because when I went into the Peace Corps, I was in my 20s, 25, 26, certainly a lot older. And obviously it had more of an impact on me than the experience I had in the seminary when I was just a teenager. But I always have felt very proud of the 6 years that I spent in the seminary. And it wasn't until I read your book that I began to understand perhaps why. But certainly the Peace Corps experience, and I think Bill and Pete can probably talk about it, it changes your whole worldview. And that's what was so amazing about it to me. I mean, you've got to meet so many different people. And I have to say, looking at the screen tonight, you know, we got all these old white men here. You know, the diversity that we experienced in the seminary was very, very little, if none, right? I mean, look at us, right?
Yeah.
And so I think for all of us going overseas and getting out of this country and seeing how other people lived and their cultures was definitely eye-opening. And I think probably, I don't know if Pete and Bill feel the same way, but that certainly was a big part of why that's probably the most important experience of my life.
I'd like to jump in. As you were sharing there, it occurred to me that if we had counseling and an effort to bring us together in the seminary, instead of focusing on isolation, it probably would have been a much better experience.
Well, Norb, if you get a chance to talk a lot with current major seminarians who went in at 18 or their early 20s, I wouldn't want to be them, let's put it that way. By the same token, I'm always impressed. Nobody tricked them. They actually are into discernment. There's a reason they're there. There's a lot more help for them to leave if they wish to leave. But the difference between being a naive adolescent and being a mainly young adult, listening to them is huge. Again, I don't necessarily agree with their approach to God, life, and the church, etc. But I've got to admire, they made a more informed choice. They tend to bond better with each other. They sound more like Peace Corps people, to be honest, than we ever did when we were kids. And it's pretty obvious. It's called emotional maturity and intellectual maturity. And I'm always impressed when I talk to them. So if you get the chance sometime, check in with a few of those guys. You know, some of them get me upset with their positions, but I always admire them. They at least have made a choice, and no choice was made for them. They made a choice. So
I want to add one more quick thing about my own story. I went into counseling when I was 51 or 2 or something like that. I'm 53. I realized that it wasn't all the seminary. I think I was a little screwed up myself.
Can I ask Bill Gebhard a question?
Sure, I might
I was
even
wondering,
answer.
Bill, when you went to Escondido, did you get a Parker?
Good one.
Somehow I don't think we want to know what that meant. Time-wise, guys, I had blocked out 3 hours. So we got plenty of time yet to go before something happens. In the meantime, on my list, I got Dave Hooper and then Jim Lozier again. Dave.
Wasn't there a Hogan there somewhere?
What? Yeah, he was. Wait a second.
He's there. Hogan there.
He's there.
Okay, that's the guy with the phone?
That's right.
Guy.
Oh,
can you guys see me or not?
yeah.
Yeah.
See, I just didn't have your name down below it.
Okay. I thought I was getting left out a second time there, Bill.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for that.
All right.
Joe, I've got a couple points to make. The first one is a point about St. Joe's, and the second one is a question to you. The first one is, and you guys that were at the reunion a couple years ago remember this. I made a statement when people were getting up talking about memories about Joe Shaw, because I've done a fair amount of work for organizations like SNAP because of some of my own history with a priest when I was growing up in Ionia about sexual abuse. And I wondered about Joe Shaw. And one of the things I mentioned was, and you guys will remember this, I think most of you, about study hall and the big study hall, and the proctor sitting up on the raised platform would call up students and tell them that Joe Shaw wanted to see him in his apartment. So we would go up there. I'm not sure if I went up there or not. That's one of the things I've struggled with for a long time. I have memory snippets of that, but I'm not positive. I'm also not positive that I did not. I have felt pretty sure that there was something going on there, because I think all you guys know that people used to laugh about that. And there was one of the guys at the reunion that said we all knew why we were afraid of Joe Shaw. So people knew some things. I did hear from some people after I made that announcement that they didn't know this personally. They weren't reporting this personally, but they had heard that he did things like hernia examinations, which is kind of a typical thing for a pedophile priest, to do some kind of medical sort of things. So I've wondered that for a long time. And if that did happen, that is something along with the seminary that has impacted my development. Like what Mike said earlier and what you've said, Joe, about emotional maturity, I think about it sort of arrested development. I feel like I lost some years there. Not that there weren't good things. I'm pretty good at Jeopardy, as most of you guys are too, right? So there's that part. So here's the question, Joe. I went immediately to chapter 12 in your book because that's my main interest, is the sexual abuse in the church, and especially the cover-up of the sexual abuse. Moving people around. In chapter 12, you deal with that to a large degree. It seems to me, and I haven't finished the book yet, so I haven't read everything you've said about this, but it seems to me that you mention several instances of homosexual interaction between students. I didn't see much in there, if anything, about sexual abuse of seminarians of boys by priests. And I haven't heard a lot about it around the country. I think there were one or two seminarians. I did write a letter to the Attorney General in Michigan when they started the investigation into the Catholic Church about 2 years ago. And one of the things I mentioned in that is that seminary was the biggest concentration, as they all were, of young men, adolescent boys, and priests, largely unsupervised by any outside body, except for the bishop in the country. And I'm just curious if you have any other information about that, Joe, or kind of what you think about that.
So you threw me when you said chapter 12. I was just sneaking a peek at my own book here.
I'm chapter 9, I think. Is that right?
There you go.
I'm sorry.
It's chapters 8 and 9.
Yeah.
Chapter 8 was sex in the Sem. And like probably the vast majority of you, I had zero clue. It was only years later when people would tell me what was going on, and it wasn't pervasive. It was limited to a relatively small number of guys, at least in my sem and in most sems of the people I've interviewed, and they found out about it later. There were a few of the guys that I interviewed who knew what was going on and or saw it, whatever. The next, so that was just basically to say, my point was there. So what do you expect in a highly regimented, super disciplined place? You're not going to get a lot, even if the desire was there. But in a way, there was always that smaller percentage of guys who would, if you will, go around and take care of business, which is, they had hormones. They did what you'd expect them to do. Some of them were homosexual and later were outed themselves as homosexual, but a lot of them, it was in fact hormonally driven, emotionally driven. They would get into these relationships with people, and a lot of it wasn't sex. It was in fact just emotional, because we didn't get a lot of that. And in fact, most of us, nod your heads if you're like me, you had a ton of friends and very few friendships, because you didn't share a whole lot. And if you got too close to somebody, someone would say something to you. And especially if that were a student who was a bit younger. The next chapter, though, that I guess you read was the one on the abuse. And to the best of my knowledge, until I got into this project, I had zero sense that anything like that happened at my sem. That must have happened other places. When I would hear about it with SNAP, and when I'd read about it with the people who are leading that movement, which I think has been a very healthy movement and been very good for a lot of guys who kept that rage, and I would have been one of them, kept that rage inside. You don't tell what went on in Las Vegas. You hold that for your whole life. Thank God I didn't have to hold it for my whole life. It didn't happen to me. But I have, in fact, met enough and certainly read enough. For the most part, if you remember in chapter 9, I looked at the data on the reasons for individuals, priests, to engage in. It's very fuzzy, very difficult to nail down. The science has not even come close to catching up to this issue. There's a lot of focus on the culture. There's a lot of bogus stuff where they got you chasing celibacy, as if celibacy has much to do with anybody's desires for sexual encounters with generally they aren't pedophiles. There's another term, I can't remember what it is, but it's not for children, it's for adolescents. And that, no one really can explain that completely, never mind whether they're priests. The part for me, once I really got into it and that fit my training as a criminologist, was the opportunity notion. The way priests were scattered throughout that place, just about any seminary, their offices were off limits. No one ever checked on them. They were private. They were sacred. And guys would go in there, just as you're saying with that guy Shaw, whoever, that was not, I got it. I mean, later, I sure got it. And it's pretty clear. Now there was a fellow, we're 73, a guy, one of my former classmates, divulged on one of our email lists. He said, I've been hesitant to read Joe's book because of all the sexual abuse that I had in the sem. Everybody's jaws dropped. They didn't know. Then I find out later, there was a brother who used to go down the hall of one of the younger guys who was 18. So it was technically okay, but it was abhorrent in the middle of the night. And he did it all the time. So it was going on, but it's called opportunity. And if you think about the whole notion of that place where they took us, they fenced us in, and they weren't planning to abuse us. I don't mean that, but the whole way a seminary was set up, there was no oversight. Nobody came in and checked. Nobody interviewed young boys and said, have you had any trouble here? Nobody ever broke the omerta. Nobody ever told if they were there. So for me, the focus was on that unhealthy institutional concept. I mean, I don't like that guys got hurt, and I definitely don't like that priests did that. But it was part and parcel of the notion of that kind of an institution that was completely shut off from the rest of the world, and nobody looked. And nobody even thought it could happen. These were priests. Think of the parents later on who realized their kid got nailed there. Oh, my God. So anyway, I hope I answered your question.
But
Yeah, you did. Yeah, just one other quick point. That's the guys who were at the meeting have heard from me. We are a very small sample here
Mhm.
of all the boys and men that went to St. Joe's. My fervent wish is that if any of you guys know anybody who may not be here, and they're the people that I think of, the people who something might have happened to and who haven't come forward. I hope that you'll give them my name and my contact information, or at least be open to the fact that there may be people out there like that, because like I say, we're a small group.
Yeah.
So
And,
thank
and you're a small group. And I will say, though, what shocked me once I looked at this globally, never mind just US seminaries and other kinds of institutions with adolescents, I mean, it was stunning. Absolute blind, places for the blind, kids, I mean, and you're just going, oh my God. So we let this go on way too long before some of the braver folks among us started to come forward, and it all started to break really down in Louisiana, in Lafayette, Louisiana, with that priest in the 1980s who became the poster child. So yeah, I would encourage anybody, you know, we're all old enough now, and sometimes this stuff comes out in a conversation. I hope they're not still holding it in. I hope they do send, you know, to you. That would be a very healthy thing.
I want to add one thing for Joe's benefit. You mentioned that the profs were in a special area and it was off limits. Joe Shaw's room, apartment, as somebody called it, I'm not sure if he had more than just an office, was on the 3rd floor, which is where the dorms were.
Yeah.
It was not where the rest of the priests were.
Yep.
No, that's how it was set up. I mean, my recollection, we had about 4 big dorms and for kids, and then the college dorms, and each floor of those had a priest, proctor, supervisor, whatever you call it, who was in charge of that floor. Nobody ever went there except a kid. No priest came down there. They didn't sit around and visit. They had their own headquarters they could go to if they wanted to drink and talk. And they ate dinner together. But otherwise, that was a sacred, hidden place. The only people really who ever went in there were kids. And not all of them obviously were abused. So it was, again, it's an opportunity structure that I hope those couple of seminaries that are hauling in these 11 and 12-year-old kids, I hope someone has learned from all of this and is overseeing it in a way that makes it potentially much less likely to happen. That's my hope.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay, now back to alpha order. I think the next one up is Dave Hooper and then Jim Lozier.
Well, that was just a good example of how I learned my St. Joe's lessons, because as you remember from any study hall you were in, we were always in alphabetical order. And you stayed that way all the way through. Well, for 4 years in my life, it was Hazard, Hogan, Hooper, and Hunter. Whether you were in study hall, whether you were in the dorms, no matter where you were. So I always knew I came after Hogan.
Yeah.
So,
I'll tell Mike.
Tell Mike that for him, right?
Yeah,
He did me through the whole way, right? That occurred to me. I was trying to locate, since I'm the only one from my class, but that isn't different from anyone else's class by all that many years, but how I relate to how, because I was from the Lansing diocese too. So one way I knew where I connected here was the Hazard, who's been mentioned, Hogan, Hooper sequence that I spent 6 years living in. And also Chuck Fisher, being from the Lansing diocese, was close friends. And Hazard and Fisher and I all went to Sacred Heart Seminary together after we left St. Joe's. So we had 2 more years together even after St. Joe's. So, and I'm still very much in touch with Mike and with Chuck. And I think I want to talk to Mike Hogan soon too. So if anybody there sees him soon, let him know, or feel free to give him my number or whatever. I've got this whole pad full of notes based on the last 2 hours. So I may be skipping around from item to item, picking up on things that have already been said.
Dave, can you adjust your camera? We can't. You just see half your face.
I'm sorry. Let me just,
there you go.
And let me take the glasses off, then you can know I do have eyes.
Very good.
I play with the background. I got different maps in different places. So if I want to give the cross the nation feel, I have this. If I want to do the around the world feel or the Hawaii, I just switch backgrounds, you know. So but mainly I leave my glasses off because then you can know I have eyes. Otherwise, the way my lights are positioned, it just looks like I have two glares in the middle. Switching from St. Joe's to Sacred Heart, just for some who mentioned that, Bill Gebhard, I think. The way I usually tell the story is St. Joe's kind of came to seminary reform at the end of the line. They were not leading the charge by any means. And so one of the serious discussions that I remember having when I was in the 6th class and in St. Henry's, and we were allowed to have beverages in the room for the first time, but not food. One of the philosophical discussions that went on was about Tang. Was Tang a solid that was allowed, forbidden, or was it a liquid that was allowed? So that's our philosophical. I think
Frank, I think we're getting some feedback from you.
For me?
Yeah.
What do I do with that? I'll mute the mic, okay, when I'm not using it. And that should do it.
That did it.
Okay.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Good moderation, Bill. Oversight. Anyway, the Tang liquid or is it okay in your rooms or not? Went from there to Sacred Heart Seminary in Detroit. Could not for the life of me figure out how this very progressive seminary, why the guys there weren't content, because everything that I ever would have dreamed of wanting in a seminary was already there, and they were dissatisfied with and looking for more. So, I mean, instead of debating the essence of Tang, we were marching with Martin Luther King. You know, in 1965, we were spending weekends in the homes of Black families so that we could get a feeling of what it's like to be Black, and then inviting them to our homes, which really scared my dad. And I was really judgmental at that stage of my life about him, about that, because, you know, he just didn't want the neighbors, I was all afraid of what the neighbors would thought. Well, when I grew up a little bit, I realized that he was more concerned about property values than people's opinion. And if people saw Black family coming to our home, thinking that perhaps we were considering selling our home to a Black family, and what would the neighbors think of that and the impact on the neighbor. It was more complicated than I thought. But that just came from an experience that I never would have had from St. Joe's at any year, interacting with Black families in the discussion of the racial issue. that was a big jump from Tang to racism. But that was kind of an eye opener for me. And then to see, but my Detroit classmates were still chomping at the bit for more renewal, more progressives enough, let's get with the church and catch up with the times and that. So for me, it was like all my dreams of a seminary come true. Everything that I ever could have dreamed of and wanted was already there, but there still was more. Jim Swiat also was, someone mentioned Jim Swiat, a Lansing diocese priest that I was close friends with, or have been close friends with. And speaking of priests, the one thing I haven't heard any of us talking about was, as a major event in our life, was our ordination. And there's nobody wears special clothes. So first of all, Joe, in your book, were any of the 24 people that you dealt with ever ordained priests?
Oh yeah, about a third of them. And it's funny, one of them is, I mean, you wouldn't know because he's all hidden in there and I don't use anybody's names, but one of them's a kid who was a year ahead of me in school, in grade school and in the Sem. And he's the one, there's a quote in there, he's the one who was like this, was about ordination. He was a good kid and he did get ordained. And then it was interesting, the scope of his priesthood kind of just went like this. And he said, I chased ordination all my life. And then when I was ordained, I realized it wasn't something I wanted to do. And I could see that from minor Sem. It made me very sad that happened to him in major Sem. And that to me was, at least in that era, and I've heard a lot of other priests and former major seminarians say it, they weren't asking what. In fact, the same guy said one day one of his professors came in and started around the class saying, why do you want to be a priest? And they got about halfway through and the bell rang. And this guy says, I would have been about the next one that he asked, and it never came up again. And I just chugged on. So ordination was a big deal. I mean, there are several, lots of them I got really good interviews with, and it was a huge thing in their life. But, very few of them, you're unusual in your very positive notion of your major Sem. And even among those who were ordained, most of them didn't have a happy major Sem experience. And a lot of them even said we were just left too much on our own. We had lots of friends, but no friendships, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And we just didn't get the experience that we should have had in order later in life to have made the contributions we hoped for.
Well put. Yeah. I think it was Bill Gebhard who was referring to the Cursillo type experience at Sacred Heart Seminary, and I think it was called Christacom, as I remember, Bill. It was specifically for college students in the Detroit area, of which Sacred Heart was considered one of the colleges.
Yeah.
So we weren't an entity, one of a kind entity. University of Detroit and Mercy and those other schools all sent students together, so there were girls and boys, to have this Cursillo-like experience on a college level.
Yeah.
But that was a good way of being involved in the larger community, because it opened eyes. Well, like Bill noticed girls, I mean, there's just wonderful things that happen in mixed communities that don't happen as much when you're just looking at other guys all your life. I also remember thinking of St. Joe's as kind of, someone said, 6 years of high school. Remember, we called ourselves first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth class.
Mm-hmm.
No one was a high school senior. You were in fourth class. No one was a college student. You were in fifth class.
It's funny when you say that. We were high school, our class, we were class of 65 because that was our high school graduation. And then we stayed 2 more and we were called college men. That said, we had special status. I don't think we had truly, other than the writing and the reading stuff, truly rigorous college education. But like almost all of you had said, when I went off to college then afterwards, man, I was top of the class without even trying.
Right.
We didn't learn a ton, but we sure learned how to do a ton. And I think that was part of it. Yeah.
I always had trouble when friends all my life talk about their high school graduation because I don't have any experience. I remember what it was.
Yeah.
There was a mass and we were acknowledged. The 4th class was acknowledged as the high school graduates. And after it was over, we processed out alphabetically, went through the reception room at the front entrance of St. Joe's, the one across from the office. And it was J.P. Weisengoff in my year anyway, just handed out diplomas as you walk through. And that was high school graduation. So I don't have too many high school graduation stories that I can share when I'm in groups with other people who had real high school graduations. It just
Let me interrupt here for a second. We've got about 50 minutes and we've got 8 more guys to hear from. So
got it.
Let's see if we can pick up the pace a bit.
You can do that. Go ahead.
Next on the list would be Jim Lozier and then Frank Marfia and then Mike Murphy. Jim Lozier.
Okay, you want me to say something now?
Yeah, say something.
Yeah,
We're in the middle of the alphabet.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that. Joe, I read the book. I didn't finish the whole book yet. I'm at chapter 6 or 7, I think. But it did help me understand a little bit why I've always been proud of my 6 years there. I'm not a fan, and I agree with you, taking kids, 13 years of age and training them to be a priest is too young. I mean, that's definitely what I agree with. But for me, I'm really glad it was there. I was one of those runaways you described before. And so for me, God gave me the seminary. I mean, I think it was a perfect solution for my issues. So from that standpoint, I'm fine for that experience that I had. I think it really was well equipped me for some of the other roles I was going to play in my life. And you mentioned in there that it was in the book that it was a place where there were rules and not relationships. And I think for me, that's what I kind of recall. But I think it prepared me to be more self-disciplined, to tolerate more stress, in my life. Certainly taught us responsibility. And so all those things from my perspective were positive. I do feel, and at first I resented and was angry about the fact that they didn't really talk about our relationship with God as being kind of the reason we were there. But I realize now that they couldn't, because they didn't have that to give. I don't think they were trained at that time about really developing their relationship with God. And so you can't give what you don't have. And so I don't really hold that against them anymore. I've got to forgiven that. It was what it was, but certainly they gave me a lot of other things and a great education. And I think that's part of the reason I've always been proud of the 6 years I spent there, is because I've always felt that it really prepared me well, gave me a good foundation, built a good container for me so I could go out into the world and decide what I wanted to keep and what I wanted to get rid of,
Could I just 1 second, Jim, just before I forget this one? a guy I was talking to not long ago was talking about the same stuff, and I don't disagree. It really gave us a good foundation. By the same token, we weren't exactly a random sample of kids out there. We already, even runaways, were pretty special, and they were all smart. And I think the average of us probably would have done quite well outside. We don't know that because we weren't. But you know, I think we tend probably, this guy's argument was, we tend to give more credit to the sound than is due. I don't really care, but he did kind of get me when he said that. I often don't think, you know, enough of the fact that back in our day, the church didn't go into, or the vocational director didn't go into a school and just cast a net and got some losers as well as some winners. Now, they were pretty careful about who they chose, and the whole process, the reason we had such a high drop rate in those first 2 years, they didn't mess around. If this person wasn't someone who they were going to be able to hold and work with, man, gone. A little later in the 70s, a little longer they kept them because the numbers were going down so fast. But so it isn't that I disagree. It's just that for me now that I've thought a lot about it, it's a bit more nuanced in terms of who we were and how well we did. And by the way, I should say, almost every one of the runaways says exactly what you said. It was safe harbor, and they are so grateful for it because in many, I mean, it was usually a drunk dad who beat them up. That was the major one. And they can't thank that opportunity to get away. They can't be thankful enough for that. That they always say it.
But I thank you for the book because I've always kind of felt that all of us, you know, when I've ever run into people, not necessarily from this group, but those that have been in the seminary, in the book you talk about, they'll say that, but then there's no further discussion. Nobody ever talks anymore about it. And I've always wondered, like, what is the deal? I believe that like 6 years together, you spent a lot of time, so much things in common that nobody wants to talk any further about it. Yeah. But I think all of us, I would ask everybody here tonight, I think all of us are proud of the time that we spent and the training that we got, the self-discipline in particular. And I think that that is a bond that holds all of us together because it is a unique experience. And I think for me, the part about not wanting to talk too much about it is there's this part of feeling guilty because I left. You know, I didn't finish what I had started.
Because you started it at 13, Jim. 18, all right, man, that was a decision, but yeah.
I understand that now, but the point was, I think that was the negative part where I felt proud to have gone to the seminary and to have developed that foundation, as I said, but I think it was the guilt of leaving, and I don't know if other people felt the same way, that's why the conversation never got any further. Oh, I went to the seminary. Oh yeah, I did too. Well, boom, that would be, but I don't feel that way anymore. I think it was certainly a very instrumental part of my life, and that and the Peace Corps are probably my two most memorable times. But I do think that the one thing I noticed when I started going to Aquinas full time is that all the women there knew I was in the seminary, and I thought, how did they know? You know, is it posted on my forehead? And I think it was probably my lack of social skills that clued him in.
Yeah,
there's no clue what he's doing here, right? But yeah, so it was to me overall a positive experience, and I'm glad you did write the book, though, Joe.
Thank you.
How about Frank Marfia, followed by Mike Murphy and then Stas?
I'll try not to be too long-winded. I tend to be. I like the book. I read the whole book. I was very interested in chapter 5, where it talked about the 3 types of typical seminarians who enter. Either they are anointed, either by priests or nuns or themselves, or their parental offering, or their runaways. And the interesting thing for me was that I was a mixture. I was both an anointed, the nuns and the priests were eager to push me in. And I was a runaway from not an abusive father, but a disorganized family. My mother had died 2 years before when I was 11. And my father was a very ineffective parent. He was an absent parent. He had 2 jobs. I give him credit for that, but he was almost never home. So it was the children, his 7 children, who basically took care of each other. And then we had a couple of housekeepers the first 2 years. They were disasters. So for me, going into the seminary was going from a disorganized life into a much more organized, and I liked it. I liked the organization. I have to give honest statement to that fact. I did well. I was a good student. I made friends. I learned a lot of skills in the seminary, mostly card playing, tennis, ice skating, but I learned things that I didn't do. I didn't have those skills when I was living in small town Michigan. But the other chapter that I was most interested in was the unmarked exit chapter. Now, I left after 8 years. I finished the 6 years, moved on to a really great seminary in Texas, San Antonio Assumption Seminary. Really dynamic leadership. We had excellent education. Half of my classmates in the major seminary were Hispanic. So it was a good cultural mix and all those good things that I enjoyed. I left on my own terms. I left because I no longer wanted to be a priest. But what happened to me in year 6 in the minor seminary, there was an event in our last year there, our 6th year. I think it was February or January, we were all required to take this 5-hour Minnesota psychological test. I forget the name of this test, but it's, maybe you've heard of it, Joe. Anyway.
Real fast, that was part of movement, Frank. And around that time, for those of us in the 60s, they pulled in a whole bunch, IQ, Minnesota, a whole bunch of them. So you guys weren't alone there. That was going on across the country.
Well, we were promised, because we had some questions, a lot of us did, and we were promised that the results would be confidential. Only we would get the results, and maybe our spiritual advisor would get the results. They would not be shared by the whole faculty. Well, that was a lie.
Yeah.
We were told by, I guess, some younger priests that all of the results were shared at a faculty meeting. And based on the results, 4 of the seminarians would be asked to leave at the end of the year. 4 of our classmates. I don't know who they are. I don't know if any of you remember this. We went on strike. We stopped attending classes for 3 days. Monsignor Moran met with us twice. The first time he put us down. He said we were all off base. We went back and we didn't stop our strike. We brought him back 2 days later. We had Paul Banner. Paul, hopefully I'm not putting you on the spot, but to this day, you're a little bit of my hero. You were magnificent. You got up in a meeting with those of us in our 6th year and Monsignor Moran, and you told them to be quiet. I think you might have even used the word shut up and listen to our grievances. And I don't know that anything positive came of it. I don't know if the students who were asked to leave were allowed to stay, but it was near the end of the year. It was a huge point of disillusionment for me. It probably led to me leaving 2 years later.
I'd like to make, I think it's 3 comments on that.
Okay.
What I presented to Monsignor Moran was, it was put together by another group, including at least 1 faculty person. And I won't mention his name, but you probably know who it is.
I might not have known that.
And I was asked to make the presentation, and maybe it was a big head, but I think of all of us, I was the model seminarian of the group.
You were.
I thought for sure you were going to be a priest, Paul. Honestly.
And well, at that point, I thought so too. But following up on that meeting, I think it was Jim Hammond, and I'm forgetting who the second person was, but there were three of us right after the school year ended who were asked to meet with Bishop Babcock. And we sat down around a table and discussed all of it again. And I don't think it was a threatening discussion. I didn't feel it was a threatening discussion. No, we have discussed before that we did not receive our philosophy assignments until into the year.
Right, we didn't get our
And I
assignments
think
to the
part
next
of
level.
that- Yeah, part of that was that Bishop Babcock was looking to, respond to this, in a positive fashion. And a reminder that Bishop Babcock was a participant at the council. And I think most of the Michigan bishops, they were Vatican II people. They weren't trying to drag the traditional church into this, that they were looking to progress.
Okay, good. That's a good clarification. I didn't know that there extra involvement beyond that second meeting with Monsignor Moran. So that's my comments,
And
Joe.
the meeting was with Bishop Babcock, not with Monsignor Moran, and he was not in the meeting.
Oh, that's interesting to know. I do remember being called back to the seminary in June or July for our next level of assignments. And that's where the Monsignor Moran asked for 2 volunteers to go to San Antonio, Texas. It was absolutely the best decision of my life. I had a great 2 years, the last 2 years in the seminary. It just so happened that I was disillusioned with the church in other ways, and I left at the end of that 8th year with a degree in philosophy.
Great.
Go ahead, Joe.
Okay,
Any
Mike
comments?
Murphy, Stas, and then Jerry Stein. I didn't miss anybody.
What, my turn?
Yeah.
Okay. Joe, first of all, I want to thank you for writing the book. That's somebody had to write this, and I'm glad it was you because it was such a good book too. I've got a couple of questions though. I think in the book that you just touch upon that the population of the seminaries went downhill after maybe 66 or something like that.
60.
Why did that happen? I'm not a social scientist, so I don't get into these things, but I'm just curious as to why there's suddenly stopped, like people suddenly stopped coming to the seminary.
Yeah, there were a number of interwoven reasons looking back. Clearly you didn't feel it then. Part of it was that, and I think Vatican II is unfairly blamed. Vatican II did not cause it. It caused some adjustment difficulties within the church, and it caused some of the major recruiters, being priests and nuns, in that immediate conservative crash, conservative versus more liberal crash, not to encourage kids to go on as they did. But that was a fairly small piece of it. It wasn't demographic, as I once believed before I did the research. You still had enough kids available, especially in the kinds of Catholic families we're talking about, to have populated seminaries quite a way. The biggie seems to be that you got a change in American Catholicism that we often don't think much about, and in America's economy that we don't think in these terms. But what seems to have happened is those old enclaves, like some of you up in some rural town, a German or Irish town, Catholic, for a lot of cities, Italian neighborhood, Polish neighborhood. After the war, after World War II, you began to see a mushrooming Catholic population in the suburbs, and it spread out. So there was more heterogeneity, even if it was only Germans, Italians, and Irish still, but they mixed. And the other thing that happened at that time, including the GI Bill that was encouraging college, is that most of us who were born after World War II went in with a much different sense of opportunity, even if we never really thought about it. The kids who were before us, often it was upward mobility in the sim, or go back and shovel manure back, or work as a clerk in the store back in the small town. We were in an era that had a much higher level. It was never doubted that any of us could go to college. Hey, my parents, that was a huge deal. So the thing, I think that as you got the tensions from from Vatican II, and you got the opportunity notions that were out there in the world at the time, you started to get kids who were otherwise just floating, beginning to say, do I want to do it, a little earlier than they used to. And it happened really fast. I mean, it fell off the table. But the same thing happened with priests leaving the church, nuns leaving the church, brothers leaving the church. It was this, straight on down. And the church, in terms of numbers and in terms of the number of schools and parishes they now have to try to keep going, has never recovered. It flattened out a bit, but they've never picked it back up. I hope that answers your question somewhat.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, that does tell me something. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
And the Stas?
I couldn't really identify with your first 5 chapters. I came from a Catholic family. We said the rosary every night, went to church on Saturday. Of course, a few times my older brother and I would go up in the belfry, look at the bells and, stuff like that. My mother always kept track of us because we had to bring the bulletin from last week home to show that we were there.
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting. I have a younger brother, 8 years younger, and we went to the reunion 2.5 years ago. I met him outside of Lansing, and we drove, and so we had a lot of talking and stuff. And we both agreed that leaving from home to the seminary was no different. I mean, we were very disciplined. Do what you want to do, in a sense, as long as it was in parameters. I have a sister who's a nun. So out of the 5 kids, 4 of us went somewhat religious. I still have a sister, the nun. And I remember her telling me that it's nothing greater than having somebody make all your decisions for you. And even to this day, I get in trouble with my wife. What do you want to eat? Doesn't matter. In the military, in the seminary, you just ate what they gave you, did what you were supposed to do. But I think the discipline and stuff was very important. It really showed all the way through that I would do things that other people wouldn't do. I would maybe volunteer but I would just automatically do it because it needed to be done. And that's kind of the way I was taught at home. We lived a mile away from church, but 5 minutes to Vespers on the Sunday, get a call. The people didn't show, the altar service didn't show, come to church. So without washing up or anything, hop on the bike and, stuff like that. So we were always disciplined, always moving towards that church-oriented stuff. I don't know if anybody is a lay deacon of our group, lady I worked with, husband was a cop in Pontiac, and took all the courses, and he is a lay deacon. And she asked me why I never went to it, and I never thought about doing it. And my answer, just off the top of my head, without ever really thinking about it, is I didn't think I was holy enough. And I think that goes kind of back to, always saying the prayers, and I do that now. I love that discipline, and hard to make up my own prayers if you think about it. I got called up to Monsignor Shaw, but he wanted to know what the heck was happening with our class, because this was when all that striking and turmoil and stuff. So I was, surprised when, it was mentioned back 2.5 years ago, and then today, that there was some suspicion and stuff. I just, I had no idea that was happening at the time. One of the things I kind of have said, my mother's very, very strict, and we were all, like I said the rosary every night and all this stuff. When I left the seminary, I had a part-time job, I think arranged through Monsignor Moran or whatever. But I remember being at home in the living room, my younger brother, sister being out in the backyard. My mother would call them in to come and eat, and then have them tell me to come and eat. She was that angry at me for leaving the seminary. Yeah. But over the years, that has mellowed out and stuff. But that was, I thought it was a good place to go. The education, the discipline, and we mentioned being socially inept. I remember going on a home call with a physical therapist, because we worked with kids under age 3, did evaluations. And I remember later that day, we were just, the group of us were talking and stuff, and she turned towards me and she says, I've been flirting with you all day, and you had no idea that I was doing it. And I still don't. So, but I'm proud of going to the seminary. I think it's a discipline. Proud of the military. I fly my flag every day. And I enjoy all you guys. And I've thought about you over the years too. And especially since this started, but 2.5 years ago for the reunion. So that's all.
Okay, on to Jerry Stein and then Frank Unger.
Can I ask, just before that, real quickly, Joe, sorry, Stas mentioned something about the deacons. And one thing that I've always been a mystery about to me is the fact that we had, these people left, but they never came back to us or invited us, especially with the education we've had, to maybe be a deacon. So I don't know if
I was never asked.
I know a few guys who were in the SEM who are deacons, but the average of them, were never asked and never thought of it, thought they were too unholy or whatever, that it wasn't part of their lives. And I don't think the average Catholic who becomes a deacon goes that direction because anybody asked that individual. I think they stayed in tight with the church. They love the church, and they would love to get involved more. What wasn't there when we were younger were those opportunities. Now the shortage of priests and trying to hold together, let's say 4 parishes with 1 priest, all of a sudden that space for somebody to step in what we call a deacon role is there. And I think what you're seeing probably in some ways, not us individually, but guys like us who have stayed close to the church, they're volunteering. And I think sometimes we don't realize it's pretty hard work for them too, and hard for their families. But it's never been something we could go ask the average kid in school right now, in the few Catholic schools that are still around. They aren't thinking of becoming a deacon. And then once they get a little older, they get the stake in the system, never mind their religious side, where being a deacon is a draw on their time and on their family. And even if they wanted to be one, they would say, I'm not going to become one till I'm quite a bit older. That's just my take. I haven't studied it and don't have a better answer for you, Richard, but you know.
Jerry.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Joe, for being with us tonight. I didn't know I was anointed until you told me I was anointed. About early at St. Francis Traverse City, where we had strong Dominicans, Sister Serenas in 2nd grade, Sister Rose Patrice 5th, Sister Irwin 7th, 8th, and Sister help me, Pete. But anyhow, we had a strong Catholic group of nuns, and from 4th grade on, when we were altar servers, we were trained and we were selected, and we were the ones who did the funerals, and we really felt special. And all that time we're going through the 6th, 7th, and 8th grades, and we got a messenger. I was Catholic messenger. Something on the back would offer ads from the Salvatorians in Wisconsin. You mentioned the Salvatorians. Well, yeah. There was a little coupon. I filled it out one time about 7th grade. They invited me to come over for the summer.
Yeah.
Crossed the big lake in the ferry system in Lake Michigan from Ludington to Manitowoc, and my mother and her neighbor friend took me over there, and I spent a week there before I even knew I wanted to go to the seminary. But it was just something that was planted kind of early. And then I had a cousin who was ordained a priest in that same year, Precious Blood Father, Father Bill Buth, who just died recently in Guatemala as a missionary. At any rate, those events, I think, kind of propelled me, and I didn't know I was anointed until you said I was anointed. But it was a good group of people to go to the seminary. We went in as 8th graders to take the test, and I remember there were about 6 or 7 of us, Pete included, Chris Mulcahy, Fred Deco, Jim Flickinger, Tom Schneider, a bunch of guys, all from our 8th grade. And there was one young lad, Tom, I won't give you his last name, but he was able, I think, to go take the test and did well, as we all did, but he wasn't allowed to go to the seminary. And the reason he wasn't allowed, Joe, his parents were divorced.
Yep. I was going to say it, and then I said, he'll say it. Yeah.
And as a 13-year-old, I thought that was wrong. As a, that why should Tom be deprived of that opportunity? And to go on with that story, Pete and I and some of the others were invited to the 1964 class of St. Francis High School 50 years later. So that was a few years ago. And we went there, and Tom's there. And he and I start talking. I said, I haven't seen you in 54 years or 56 years. And what do we talk about? We talked about the fact that he brought it up, that he hadn't been allowed to go to the seminary. And he was a very successful, I think, psychologist. And it just always bothered me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The other thing I just want to say, Joe, you didn't mention anything about siblings. you mentioned about parents in your book. I'm the oldest of 6, and I just wondered if there was anything that you had heard about how the siblings thought of their brother leaving and the attitude that,
No, I got you.
got away, you get all the privileges, you are, that kind of attitude.
I put a section in there on others of siblings who went away to the seminary. I didn't spend much time, and I guess that's the social scientist in me. I didn't even try to come up with a sampling framework to go interview folks like that. I have definitely had conversations with my brother and sister, and it was very clear my brother thought he got the shaft because I was the star and he was nothing. And he almost went, he told me he almost went to the seminary just to get a little of those strokes. I think it was at times, especially if they were younger than we were, the siblings, in fact, sometimes had a tough time. I know with my mother, I was the number one focus. And by the way, I love my mother. That wasn't it. And she was only a product of her time and culture too. She thought she was doing a great thing. Yeah. Getting her son ready at age 5 to go off into the seminary. But it would be a good study to kind of add to it an addendum. How do those other kids feel in the family? That would be an interesting one. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, thanks.
On to Frank Unger, Al Wahmhoff, and then me bringing up the rear like always.
Okay. Well, I'm a little different than you guys were. I lived in a little town with less than 500 people in it, and they opened up a Catholic school when I was in the 6th grade that was about 5 miles away. So I was never a super gregarious type of person. I mean, so even though I was self-anointed, nobody really I never made a big deal of the priesthood, but inside I loved my church and I thought I should give that a chance. And both my parents had great concerns about that, So I was already in kind of a sort of an isolated thing outside of sports with people outside. In the seminary, that actually broadened up a little bit. First year I was very shy, but the second year I started relaxing, getting used to people and everything. But I always had this little desire for the priesthood. But each year I always seemed to feel a little bit separated from people. My association with others to a certain extent was forced because I know I needed to be, you're a social being. And I went through the minor seminary and I was never really there because I didn't want to be or anything, but I was also kind of marching my way through. And it was only when I got to St. Mary's in Baltimore that things opened up a little bit, and I could see a little bit more, and I realized I had some concerns. And in my last year, in the 8th year there, I had a new spiritual confessor, Father Conley. And I told him, I said, something's not right here. I says, I'm not dissatisfied with the seminary or anything per se, but I says, each year I feel like I'm a little more separated, from the world. I'm in like an isolation. And so we talked about that for a long time. And I prayed a lot. I would sit in chapel for 15 or 20 minutes, just being alone with God, if you will. And over time that year, I began to realize that living without a partner in life is just not me. And I had basically just stayed tight in that state. And so I decided, we agreed that the best thing for me to do would be to leave. The ironic thing about this is after this whole process, Father Connolly told me, he says, Frank, he says, you pulled me through all of this right with you. And he says, as a result of this, I'll probably be a better priest because of it. Because apparently he went through a lot of this stuff himself. What's interesting is I read the one sentence you had in a later chapter, and it was kind of funny because some of these guys who quit in later years married the first girl they dated.
Yeah.
And I'm one of them. And I never made a big secret of the seminary. I was never wanted to say I never wanted to go or anything, but we were discussing this once. I belonged to a choir, and one of the women in the choir says, Frank, you went through that, and God sent Connie to you. And to a certain extent, yes. And that worked very well. And it was kind of interesting because she approached me, and, we would talk and everything. We started dating. And it's just like from the second date on, it was just like we were working things out. And even though you had the statement you made, Joe, about the seminarians making that kind of mistake, and it most likely could be, for me, it was just fine. We had a beautiful marriage, raised two good kids and everything. But I was the guy who, I just started from a different base point. I wasn't forced or urged to do anything, but I just came up differently than most of the people here. Outside of Stas, I'll never forgive him for beating me in the 220.
Frank,
That's my experience for the seminary. Yeah.
Frank, if I could just make sure people get it. What I was looking at and finding was a common pattern there. It was very common for guys who had just left the seminary to date the first girl they danced with and to marry the first girl they dated. I think it wasn't so much they were doomed to failure necessarily, but the number of them who ultimately got divorced, which wasn't uncommon either, and who look back and say, it isn't that I made a mistake, it's that I wish I had had more experience. Even I could then perhaps have saved my marriage. But I think God bless you, and you're luckier than some. But some of them went the other direction. Their marriage didn't work, and it was in part because that was the first girl they ever interacted with.
The thing with me though is, how do I want to say this? I did miss having more social comfort and everything with other people, because in growing up in that and not having relationships with other people, or even dated a number of women, what I realized and really had to work hard for, was I realized that I didn't have the sensitivity, the antennas up, to really to have a fuller relationship with my wife than what I did.
Yep. That's almost a quote from a lot of guys, Frank. I mean, what you're saying is really very common, and not having the antennae that picked up things that other guys, we all outgrew it in the end. You do mature, but at the beginning, when you're first out, you are hobbled a bit in the 220. You didn't have the practice, and you didn't automatically catch things that you might otherwise have. That said, you also didn't get into a lot of trouble that a lot of our peers got into.
Okay, Al, it's up to you and me to finish off the next 9 minutes.
All right, I guess we gotta be fast, huh?
Right.
Can you hear me all right? Okay.
Back row.
Yeah.
Fine. Sure, you're fine.
Yeah, well, amongst this group, I guess I probably stayed in the seminary about the longest, because it was after my third year of theology that I didn't quite flunk out, but theology was my worst subject. So I think God was trying to tell me something. If I couldn't remember his laws and rules and theology in general, maybe I could try a different, maybe I could do that summer job, being a construction worker, which I ended up doing those 46 years. But anyway, once I did take that year off to decide whether I was going to go on or not, I summer job there and thought about it. And that's the same year that Grand Rapids Diocese that I belonged to threw away my parish to the new Kalamazoo Diocese. So I'd have been with some other bishop and a bunch of other guys that I wouldn't have known. Not that that would have been any problem, but I thought there was too much politics in how they moved the priests around from those parishes that they were going to divest themselves of and put in their troublemakers into the parishes they were going to give away. And that was just part of the politics in the Catholic Church, of course, which I'm sure happens all across the country. But anyway, I thought that's another thing I didn't really like too much. And like I just mentioned, they're having a partner in life to help you get through the struggles. When I came from a family that had 76 cousins and on one side, and quite a few on my mother's side too, that maybe someone else could help me get through this eventually. So eventually, about 4 years later, I met my future wife, and we dated for a couple of years. I proposed and she said, well, let me think about it. So we had a little bit over a year engagement. We were both old enough to know whether we were going to make it or not at that time. And it has worked out so far. I'm not 50 years yet. I'm only about 45 years married. And I hope she puts up with me for a few more years.
Kind of closing things out here. In the book, I mean, there were a lot of things that others have gone through, so I'm not going to kind of repeat those. But I think the most important chapters in there were really why I went in the first place and why I left. And I looked over, the prototypes or whatever you want to call them, and I didn't seem to fall into any of those particular categories. We had I was an altar boy, and I can remember the Dominican nuns, in retrospect, probably singling me out. But then there were two others in my class, Don Bolduc, I don't know if you remember him, he left after the first year, and Neil Mullally. And I have to say, I can't ever remember even meeting with our pastor, or in those days we had an assistant pastor, to even talk about it. It just seemed, I kind of remember saying, well, I know Neil's family was going over for that May, whether it was called field day or introduction or whatever. And so they invited me to go along with them, and we picked up Don Bolduc and off we went. And next thing I knew, I was saying goodbye to my parents on the front drive. And looking back on things, it may be that my ability to get through those 6 years was because I guess in my whole upbringing, we were never really a particularly close family. So the solitary nature of the seminary sort of, well, that's the way it's always been. So I can slog it through. I do remember that in my 6th year, my younger brother had enrolled in the 1st class, and he left right at the Thanksgiving break. And he later said he was just absolutely shocked at what life was like in that brief time that he was there. The lack of hot water and the was just, I mean, he just was not prepared for it at all. And I kind of looked back and I thought, well, that was no big deal. So we went without hot water for 3 years. Big deal. I think that 6th year was when things really changed for me, as I probably mentioned before. For one, I don't ever remember having a spiritual advisor to even talk to me about what life as a priest was like. I mean, I remember my parish priest, and they were just seemed to be okay guys, associated them with the administration of the sacraments. Yeah, that sounded like something I might be interested in doing. Never talked with assistant pastor. In the 6 years, never once talked to my own pastor about what it was like to be a priest. And I can't remember even in the seminary ever having to talk with anybody about what was it like? What do you do? In retrospect, I think, how would you apply for a job with not knowing, if, for example, how you're going to get fed? But that last year, when things really came unraveled, as I mentioned before, was when I developed diabetes and was out of the seminary for 6 weeks. In that time, nobody from the seminary even checked in on me to see how I was doing, what to expect when I got back. My own pastor, I think he may have come once or twice to administer the Eucharist, but I was kind of on my own for that 6 weeks. And when I got back, well, I just picked up where I left off. I knew there were a lot of changes that had taken place in that time period. But in that next 6 months, again, nobody said to me, well, what are you going to do in the major seminary? Or here's what we expect from you, or here's what to expect. And, having diabetes and having to take insulin every day, fortunately, the sisters prepared a special meal for me. Whatever the priests were eating that day, I got served. But it never once came up, well, what are you going to do as a priest with diabetes? What's life in the major seminary going to be? Are you going to be able to get special meals? How are you going to subsist? And it just never once came up. I do remember that, and I remember this book. There was a catalog from Wayne State University in the senior library, St. Henry's Library. And that's the first time I looked at a book from another college, an education institution. I thought, well, geez, that looks pretty interesting. And somehow I managed to send in an application and got a letter of acceptance. And I can't imagine that somehow they didn't monitor my mail to know he's looking around for something. I do remember going into whoever that guy was in charge of the records and requesting a transcript be sent on. But I remember going into Monsignor Moran and saying, well, this just isn't for me. And he said, have you talked to anybody about it? And I'm thinking, It's obviously he didn't have any clue. I do remember going down the hall and talking to Father Rose and just telling him, this just is not what I had envisioned as life as a priest, especially the politics that was going on at that time. That was just incredible to see the division among the faculty over what were sort of the basics of Christian life. And so that, I just went on to the next step in my life, which again, for the next few years, it was very difficult to form relationships with anybody else. I went to live in a rooming house with 6 other guys. There weren't any dorms for men in Wayne State at the time, so that was it. And I guess the isolation of life in the seminary was a major impediment to me forming any relationships or even acquaintances beyond my colleagues in teaching and the 1 or 2 guys in the apartment building that I lived in. But anyway, I found the book very good in that sense that it had me kind of re-examining my reasons for going, my reasons for leaving, and where it all got to me to where I am today. So it was a very interesting book. So, and I thank you for that. And I thank Norb for really kind of being the guy who brought us all together. It's really interesting. I don't even remember back when your book had just come out, Norb, I decided, well, I'm going to do a Google search on St. Joseph Seminary. And there were a number of St. Joseph seminaries, but then there was one, it said Nora Bufka. I thought, I'll be darned. I know that guy. So I got the book, and that's how I connected with Norb. And he's really, I think, played a major role in kind of bringing us together. It's really been, I thank you very much for doing that, Norb. And Joe, I really appreciate the book. I know we're kind of running out of time here, so I appreciate everybody coming in for this meeting. It's the first one we had with this many folks at one time. Somehow we managed to get through it with everybody getting a chance at least to speak up. So if anybody's got any last things, now's the time to say it. Otherwise, we'll sign off until the first Monday in February.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Bill, for your kind words, and thank you, Joe, for being here. And the rest of you probably don't realize this, but Joe contacted me almost a year ago and said, "I wish I had seen your book before I wrote mine." And that's how we got acquainted.
Yeah, I was embarrassed. When I did my literature search, I must have thought it was a seminary, for a specific seminary, not a book about a seminary. And I came across it accidentally, and I wrote to him and said, "If you see my book, I don't want you to hate my guts because I didn't cite you, man. Yours. I wish I had. I would have taken some of the quotes." But that's how we met. That's how the two of us met. And so I thank you too, Norb. I've enjoyed it a lot tonight. I love talking with old Sem guys. Not old, former Sem guys. And I learn a lot every time I do it. And if I ever do a sequel, there's lots I have learned in these discussions. So thanks very much. I appreciate the time you gave me and the time you gave yourselves to talk. Keep talking.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you all.
Signing off then. Until next time.
All right.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right.